So imagine for a second that you are living your entire life inside, like a perfectly sealed glass bubble.
Yeah.
Everything you need to survive is right in there with you. The air, the temperature controls, your food.
Sounds pretty cozy, honestly.
Right. But there is a huge catch. Every single crumb of food you drop or, every bit of waste you produce, it stays in that room with you forever.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Unless some giant hand from the outside decides to open a window and literally sweep it out.
And if that hand gets a little too generous with the snacks,
Yeah.
but completely forgets to sweep, the atmosphere inside your bubble fundamentally changes.
Exact.
I mean, it's not just about clutter at that point. The air itself actually begins to turn on you.
Welcome to the deep dive. Today we are not talking about some sci-fi glass bubble, though. We are talking about a 20-gallon Dwarf Cichlid tank.
A very specific glass bubble.
Yes, and we're looking at a fascinating blog post from July 25, 2026. It's by an aquarist named Ang, and it's called Notes on Fishkeeping, Part 297.
Which is such a great piece.
It really is, because Ang accidentally turned their tank into that exact toxic bubble we just talked about. And in fixing it, they revealed exactly how the spaces we live in dictate our behavior. So, okay, let's unpack this.
Let's do it.
Our mission today is to explore how this short dispatch is actually like a total masterclass in microecosystems. Because whether you actively manage a complex aquarium yourself or you are just insanely curious about biological design, there is a profound revelation waiting for you here.
Absolutely.
It's all about how environments shape literally everything from baseline survival to complex reproductive behavior.
Because the stakes of maintaining a closed environment are absolute. I mean, a glass tank in a living room doesn't have the benefit of a flowing river or a massive oceanic current to just dilute your mistakes.
Right. There's nowhere for the mistakes to go.
Exactly. What Ang documents in this post is the severe, really unforgiving mathematics of inputs versus outputs. We are looking at the exact moment a biological system reaches its breaking point.
And the visual of that breaking point in the post is genuinely chilling. Like, Ang walks into the room and notices that the dwarf cichlids in both of their tanks are hovering entirely vertically right at the water's surface.
Which is terrifying.
Yeah.
Because that tells anyone familiar with aquatic bioloads that the environment has reached peak toxicity.
They aren't looking for food, right?
No, not at all.
Hmm.
Fish hovering vertically at the surface like that. They are gasping at the only millimeter of the water column that still holds any dissolved oxygen.
Wow.
Their gills are essentially experiencing a chemical burn.
Because over the past week, Ang admits to overfeeding them.
Yeah.
And this is where the mechanics of a closed loop get really intense. Those extra fish pellets, they didn't just sit on the bottom looking ugly.
Right, they mineralize.
Explain that. What happens exactly?
Well, when you introduce biological matter-like, highly concentrated protein pellets into a closed water system, heterotrophic bacteria immediately begin breaking it down.
So the bacteria goes to work.
Exactly. But this decomposition process consumes massive amounts of oxygen. And, even worse, it releases ammonia as a byproduct.
Which is highly toxic.
Lethal. Lethal to fish even in trace amounts. So the biological calculus of the tank completely inverted. The environment went from sustaining life to actively suffocating it.
But Ang points out something really fascinating here. Because they actually had a built-in safety net.
The cleanup crew.
Right. Both tanks were stocked with this cleanup crew of ornamental snails and live aquatic plants. And the assumption was that these natural elements would just, handle the excess.
Which is a very common assumption.
Yeah, I kind of look at this closed loop like a struggling IT department.
Oh, I like that. How so?
Well, the snails and the plants are your IT guys. They can handle the daily natural volume of minor glitches, the regular waste.
The routine support tickets.
Exactly. But when a massive server failure happens, which is this sudden barrage of unfinished food pellets, they are entirely overwhelmed. It doesn't matter how hard the IT department works. They simply cannot process a catastrophic influx of material all at once.
This raises an important question, though, about our dangerous reliance on the illusion of self-sufficiency.
The illusion of it, yeah.
We have this tendency, especially in environmental design, to assume that nature will simply scale up to fix our mistakes.
Like, oh, I put a snail in there, I'm good.
Exactly. We drop a snail into a tank and think, great, we've established a perfectly balanced ecosystem. But a snail has a fixed metabolic rate.
It can only eat so much so fast.
Right. And an aquatic plant has a maximum rate of photosynthesis and nutrient absorption. The bacterial decomposition of those uneaten pellets operates exponentially, while the cleanup crew operates linearly.
Wow, exponential versus linear, that's a losing battle.
It really is. When your input, the food, exceeds the mechanical output capacity of your system, the system doesn't just struggle, it crashes completely.
The IT department fails, the water turns to poison, and your fish end up hovering vertically just trying to survive.
Exactly.
So, realizing that this biological safety net had completely failed, Aang had to execute a severe physical intervention. You can't just wait for the snails to eat faster while your fish are dying.
No, you have to act immediately.
And this leads to a massive fundamental shift in the architecture of the aquarium itself.
Yeah, based on months of studying dwarf cichlid breeding environments, Aang decides the only path forward is to completely abandon the previous setup.
The old setup was pretty elaborate, right?
Very. The tank had featured multiple hiding spots and elaborate artificial caves.
Okay, wait. Aren't more hiding spots usually better for small fish to feel safe?
That's what you would think.
Like, why strip their home down to a single terracotta pot? If the goal is to make them feel comfortable enough to breed, why would you evict them from a mansion of artificial caves and leave them in an empty room with one single clay pot?
Because the complexity of the mansion was actually the weapon.
The weapon.
Yeah. Think about fluid dynamics. Particularly within a small glass rectangle, every physical object you place in the water alters the flow.
Okay.
When you have multiple elaborate caves, you create areas where the water velocity drops to absolute zero.
Dead zones.
Exactly. Dead zones. These are the corners and crevices where the water simply doesn't circulate.
Which means oxygen isn't reaching them.
Right. And mechanical filters can't pull water from them either. So all that unseen debris, all those extra uneaten food pellets, they get swept by microcurrents into these dead zones and just sit there,
Out of sight, out of mind.
rotting in hidden corners, completely out of sight of the snails. The complex architecture wasn't providing safety at all. It was providing a sanctuary for toxic waste.
Oh, wow. So the aesthetic design of the tank was actively sabotaging the biological function of the tank.
Precisely.
That is wild. So by stripping the environment down to a single terracotta pot, Aang is eliminating the dead zones entirely. The water can flow freely, and any debris has literally nowhere to hide.
Form-following function in its purest sense. And notice the specific materials Aang chooses for this minimalist redesign too.
Right, it's not just a pot. It's a terracotta pot, a bag of coral substrates, and then the planned addition of a sponge filter.
And none of this is accidental.
The substrate part really caught my attention. Why specifically coral? I mean, I always assumed the gravel at the bottom of a fish tank was just decorative.
A lot of people do, but in this case, it acts as a crucial chemical buffer.
A buffer.
Yeah, dwarf cichlids require very specific water parameters to thrive. When waste breaks down, it creates acidic byproducts which slowly drop the pH of the water.
Making it more acidic.
Right. Now, coral substrate is composed of calcium carbonate. As the water becomes slightly more acidic, the coral slowly dissolves and it releases carbonates into the water column.
Oh, so it neutralizes the acid?
Exactly. It naturally buffers the pH and maintains the water hardness. It is a passive, chemical defense mechanism against exactly the kind of degradation Aang just experienced.
That is so smart. And the sponge filter they plan to add later plays into this too, right? Because it's not just a vacuum cleaner.
Not at all. A sponge filter is primarily a biological engine.
How does that work?
It uses a stream of air bubbles to draw water through a highly porous block of foam. And yes, it traps physical floating debris, which improves visibility, but its real purpose is microscopic.
The bacteria.
Exactly. That foam provides massive surface area for beneficial nitrifying bacteria to colonize.
Okay, so this is different from the bacteria that was rotting the food.
Very different. These are specific bacteria, Nitrosomonas and Nitrobacter, that consume the toxic ammonia and convert it into much safer nitrates.
Wow. So Aang is basically upgrading the tank from a visual display into a high-capacity biological processing facility.
That's a great way to put it.
Which means you can't have a clean room if the room is filled with 100 different pieces of furniture for the dust to hide under.
Exactly.
And you certainly can't keep the air clean without the right invisible workforce in place.
You need the right bacteria.
So to pull off this minimalist architectural redesign, Aang obviously has to remove a significant amount of the toxic water. And in fact, they perform a drastic 90% water change.
Which is huge. A disruption of that magnitude completely resets the chemical baseline of the entire environment.
And here's where it gets really interesting, because swapping out 90% of the water doesn't just physically dilute the toxins. It acts as this massive, overriding biological trigger.
It really does.
Aang notes that a water change of this magnitude actively simulates a rainy season in the wild, and the simulated deluge is exactly what induces a pair of dwarf cichlids to mate.
It's incredible.
We are talking about hacking the seasons in a glass box in someone's living room.
What's fascinating here is how deeply ingrained these ancient survival and breeding instincts truly are, and how mechanical the triggers can be.
Because they don't know they're in a living room.
No, these fish do not consciously know they're in a living room in the year 2026. Their biology is essentially a complex piece of hardware that has evolved over millions of years in the Amazon or Orinoco River basins.
So they are completely hardwired to react to the specific chemistry of a monsoon.
Yes, in their natural habitat, a massive influx of fresh rain dramatically lowers the temperature of the water. But more importantly, it drastically reduces the total dissolved solids, or TDS.
Oh, TDS, right.
The conductivity of the water plummets because millions of gallons of pure rainwater are just diluting the river.
So how do the fish actually feel that?
The fish's osmoregulatory system, which is the way their bodies balance internal fluids with external water, it senses this massive drop in dissolved organic compounds instantly.
Through their lateral lines, right.
Exactly.
So it's an environmental signal that bypasses the brain entirely.
It goes straight to the endocrine system. In the wild, a sudden drop in water hardness and TDS means the dry season is over. The rivers are swelling, food is about to become incredibly abundant, and predators are dispersed over a much wider flooded area.
It's prime time.
It is the absolute optimal moment to expend the massive energy required to reproduce and raise offspring.
That makes so much sense.
By artificially recreating that physical sensation with a sudden influx of fresh, clean water, Aang is speaking directly to their evolutionary programming.
It is literal biological puppetry.
It really is.
You drop the TDS, the fish's lateral lines sense the pure water, and their hormones just scream, "The monsoon is here, time to build a family."
Time to go.
And as we see in the very next part of the blog post, biology is not always a perfect, predictable machine.
No, it introduces a heavy layer of behavioral reality to the experiment. Triggers are powerful, yes, but they operate within a broader context.
It introduces some severe romantic drama, if we're being honest.
Very true.
Because despite this incredible environmental hack of the simulated rainy season, Aang observes that the male fish has been persistently nudging the female fish for quite some time.
And the nudging is his courtship behavior.
Right. He is ready to go. But the female is showing a total, absolute lack of interest.
Zero interest.
And the whole ultimate goal of this entire tank reset, the terracotta pot, the coral substrate, the 90% water change, is to see if they can finally get this unrequited couple to mate.
Which highlights a crucial limitation of environmental triggers, and really the profound difference between a male and female biological investment in reproduction.
I read that part, and I genuinely felt bad for the male fish. Like, he is putting in all the effort, trying to get her attention, but it mirrors the human world so perfectly. A terrible environment completely ruins the mood.
It really does.
You can light all the candles you want, but if the room is hopelessly cluttered and the air is practically toxic from rotting garbage, it is over. You cannot ignore a disaster zone no matter how strong that seasonal trigger is.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it demonstrates a rigid hierarchy of biological needs.
What do you mean by that?
Well, Aang is utilizing a very powerful stimulus with the simulated rainy season. Under normal, healthy circumstances, that trigger demands reproduction. But the micro-stresses of a degraded environment, the chemical burn of the ammonia, the poor oxygen levels, the unseen debris rotting in the dead zones of those elaborate caves, those stresses create an immense allostatic load.
Allostatic load, so that's the accumulated wear and tear on the body.
Exactly. The stress hormones, which is the equivalent of cortisol in these fish, simply block the reproductive hormones.
Oh, wow. So she's not just ignoring him to be mean.
Right. The female's lack of interest isn't just stubbornness. It is an incredibly sophisticated biological assessment of the environment. Her physiological system is literally calculating the debt of that recent toxicity and recognizing that the underlying parameters are simply too unstable to successfully raise fry.
The survival instinct yells significantly louder than the reproductive instinct.
Always. Because a fundamentally healthy, stable environment is the absolute prerequisite for everything else. You cannot hack a system that is fundamentally broken, or in this case, still recovering from trauma.
Right.
The male might be responding to the acute trigger of the fresh water, but the female's biology is weighing the chronic stress of the past week's toxic dead zones.
You have to fix the foundation before you can build the house.
Exactly.
Or in this case, you have to completely overhaul the architecture and the water chemistry before you can expect the biology to cooperate.
It's non-negotiable.
So let's pull all of this together. We've traced a massive arc through Ang's short blog post today. We started with the terrifying visual of a toxic environment fish hovering vertically, gills burning because a closed loop was pushed past its absolute metabolic limit by overfeeding.
And the IT department failed.
Yes, we examined the complete mathematical failure of a natural cleanup crew to process an overwhelming amount of input. Then we moved through a minimalist architectural redesign, abandoning complex, dead zone creating hiding spots for a simple, highly functional terracotta pot and pH buffering coral substrate.
A total teardown.
Right. And finally, we explored the mechanics of osmoregulation, how a 90% water change acts as a simulated monsoon, a literal hack of ancient biology, all in an attempt to help one very persistent male dwarf cichlid win over a biologically hesitant female.
It really is a remarkable sequence of cause, effect, and behavioral biology, all contained within a 20-gallon glass box.
It truly is. And I think it has something incredibly pointed of you, the listener, as well.
Definitely.
Think about the ecosystems that you manage in your own life, your daily routines, your workspaces, your mental bandwidth. Are you overfeeding your daily system with inputs? Are you dropping so many tasks, so much information, so many endless commitments into your tank that your internal scrubbers simply cannot process it all?
It's a great question.
And are you wondering why things are starting to feel a little toxic? Or why you are metaphorically hovering at the surface, gasping for air in your own life? So what does this all mean?
I think it means we have to look very critically at the invisible forces and structures shaping our behavior. Because we are not as separate from these fish as we like to believe.
We really aren't.
We just discussed the profound mechanics of how a simple 90% water change drops the conductivity of a tank, bypasses the brain, and completely tricks a fish's ancient endocrine system into believing an entirely new season has arrived.
It forces a physiological response they can't even control.
Exactly. So look around the room you are in right now. What artificial environmental cues, like the endless, unyielding blue light of your screens, the constant seasonless chill of central air conditioning, or the circadian disrupting hum of fluorescent lighting at midnight, are we constantly surrounded by that are secretly tricking our own ancient human biology every single day?